friends, it's me, Mrs. Pennell. I'm here to tell you all about the history we're going to be learning this week. How do we know about the past? We see history portrayed in movies, in TV shows. There's history all around us, but how do we know if it's real? This week we're going to be learning about the key skills a historian needs, how to identify the sources for the historic research. There are so many different ways we can learn about the past. We can learn about it through movies, through TV shows, through newspaper articles. We could be looking at the bones. We could be looking at old photographs. We could be looking at old toys, artifacts, all sorts of different things. There are nearly unlimited ways to learn about the past and unlimited sources to help us sort our history research out. But are all the sources created equal? In history, we classify our sources into two different types, a primary source and a secondary source. Let's find out more about them. So, a primary source is anything which was created by humans living their life in the time frame that we are investigating and studying. So in our case, as we're learning about the Great Fire of London, so it could be anything that humans created for that time. So for example, a map, maybe a tax record from the olden days, maybe a newspaper article from the newspaper at the time, or perhaps a diary entry by a person who lived in that time. So these give us an almost accurate evidence of what the life was back in 1666. So a secondary source can be anything that talks about the time in the history that we're interested in, but it wasn't created at the time, it came afterwards. So perhaps even a year later, or hundreds of years later, or even now. So if we are talking about the Great Fire of London now, we would be quite often drawn to books about it, or films about it, or TV shows about it. So those are all secondary sources because they weren't created at the time. So the main secondary sources that we would be using would be textbooks or encyclopedias, internet perhaps, even your teacher, me, Mrs. Pennell. I am a secondary source because you're learning it from me, and I wasn't born in 1666, so I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly how life was, but I have learned my knowledge from different secondary sources as well as from the primary sources. But obviously, not all secondary sources are created equal because not all of them are true or quite correct. So, for example, even though I'm teaching you all the right things, as I wasn't there, I might not portray the subject as accurately, perhaps as a person who lived in 1666 would be able to do that. So finally, to conclude, so our primary source would be real hard historic evidence telling us exactly how things were in that time frame that we're investigating. So for example, Samuel Pepys's diary does give us a really accurate overview of what happened in 1666 in September because he was there, he lived it, he experienced it. However, secondary sources are generally an opinion. Sometimes it's a really good opinion that is based on primary sources, so they've taken their opinions and molded around the hard evidence that they've read from somewhere else and they learned from the primary sources. However, some secondary source, the opinions may not be quite true or quite accurate. So we always got to be careful. So when we're doing our research, we always have to base our knowledge on the hard evidence, which is the primary source, rather than on the secondary source. But that said, secondary sources are brilliant at finding things out first, and then if you want to know more, you need to go into the primary sources to find out the hard facts. So your task this week is to collate your primary and secondary sources. So we have given you a few pictures, few sources there to sort out into primary sources and secondary sources, and then you need to choose this week your favourite secondary source where you would get some information about the Great Fire of London and come up with questions. So you should be coming up with at least 2, 3, 4 maybe questions about that time, things you would really want to know. And then next week, when we come back to the primary sources, we will start finding out the real evidence and real answers to all of your questions. All right. So guys, go and have some fun investigating this wonderful topic that is Great Fire of London. Come up with some wonderful questions, and next week we'll see if we can find some really good answers to them as well. See you later. Take care. Bye.